Valora Fine Dining had a reputation that most restaurants in the city could only dream about from a distance. The kind of place where the wait staff ironed their uniforms twice before a Friday shift, where the ambient lighting was adjusted by the season, and where the general manager, Vivian Caldwell, had once sent back a floral arrangement because the lilies were, in her exact words, leaning 2 degrees to the left. 2 degrees. Not 4. Not 5. Just 2. And if you thought that was extreme, you clearly had never worked a dinner service under Vivian Caldwell. She was the kind of woman who walked into a room and immediately made it feel smaller. Not because she was loud. Quite the opposite. Vivian was terrifyingly quiet. She had this way of standing at the edge of the dining floor with her arms folded, her dark eyes scanning every table, every glass, every movement of every body in her restaurant, like a hawk that had somehow learned to wear a blazer. She didn't bark orders. She issued them the way a judge hands down a sentence. Calmly, clearly, and with the full understanding that there would be no appeal. Her staff called her the warden behind her back, but never to her face. Nobody called Vivian Caldwell anything to her face except, "Yes, ma'am." There is a certain kind of leader who pushes people toward greatness. They challenge their teams, they inspire, they build. And then there is the other kind. The kind who confuses fear with respect, who mistakes compliance for loyalty, who genuinely believes that a human being is only as valuable as their last shift report. Vivian was, without any shadow of a doubt, the second kind. Loyalty doesn't pay the rent, Elena. Efficiency does. She had actually said those words. Out loud. To a human being. With her whole chest. And that, right there, is where our story begins. But before we go any further, quick one. If you are watching this right now and you already know exactly where this is going for Vivian, go ahead and drop your prediction in the comments. We want to see how many of you saw it coming. And while you are down there, tell us where in the world you are watching from. If you are enjoying this so far, hit that like button right now. It genuinely helps more people find stories like this one. Hit subscribe if you are not already with us, and tap that notification bell so you are never 3 days late to a story everyone is already talking about. Watch till the end. Trust me, you don't want to miss any moment of this story. Alright, let's get back to it. Valora's dining floor on a Friday evening was the kind of organized chaos that looked effortless from the outside and felt nothing like effortless from the inside. Glasses clinked against the low murmur of conversation. The kitchen doors swung open and shut in a rhythm that the experienced staff had learned to move around like a choreographed routine. The scent of garlic butter and aged wine hung in the warm air, and every table was occupied by someone who had either paid a great deal to be there or knew someone who had. Vivian stood at the edge of it all, arms folded, blazer pressed, heels planted, watching. She always watched. She watched the way a server tilted a wine bottle. She watched the angle at which a bread basket was placed. She watched for hesitation, for distraction, for any small crack in the surface of an evening that was supposed to be flawless. And then her gaze landed on Elena Mitchell. Elena was working table 7, a foretop of corporate guests who had ordered the tasting menu and were deep in the kind of conversation that only people who have had 2 glasses of very good Burgundy tend to have. She moved around the table without intruding on a single sentence, refilling glasses at the exact moment they needed refilling, clearing a side plate with the kind of quiet efficiency that the guests registered as comfort without ever identifying the source of it. Vivian watched her and thought what she always thought when she watched Elena work. Good. Reliable, consistent. Not remarkable. Not irreplaceable. Just functional. That was the full extent of what Vivian Caldwell saw when she looked at Elena Mitchell. She did not see the 9 years. She did not see the 3,000 days of doubled shifts and covered rosters and holidays worked without complaint. She did not see the single mother who planned her daughter Sophia's entire week around a schedule that left almost no room for anything resembling a personal life. She saw a server doing her job. Nothing more. Nothing less. And that blindness, that particular expensive blindness, was the thing that was going to cost Vivian Caldwell absolutely everything. 3,285 days. Take a moment with that number. That is 9 years of showing up without fail, without excuse, without a single morning where Elena Mitchell looked at her alarm clock and decided that today was not going to be her problem. 9 years of double shifts during the Christmas season when half the staff came down with illnesses that were, let's say, suspiciously well-timed. 9 years of staying 40 minutes past close because a junior server had made a mess of the closing checklist. 9 years of clocking in early, clocking out late, and somewhere in between all of that raising a daughter alone. 3,285 days of perfect attendance. Not one absence. Not one. So when Elena approached the manager's station on that quiet Tuesday morning, hands clasped in front of her, posture straight, with the carefully rehearsed expression of a woman who had practiced this conversation in her bathroom mirror the night before, she was not asking for a favor out of habit. She was asking for the first time ever. "Miss Caldwell," she began, keeping her voice low and even, "I need to request this Thursday off." Vivian did not look up from the reservation ledger in front of her. "You're scheduled Thursday," she said. That was the entirety of her response. Elena held her ground. "I know, and I'm sorry for the short notice. It's my daughter Sophia. There's a situation at her school that I need to handle in person, and I've already spoken to 2 colleagues who are both willing to cover my." "The answer is no." Vivian looked up then, and her expression was not the expression of a woman who was angry or even particularly engaged. It was the expression of a woman who had already moved past this conversation and was mildly inconvenienced by the fact that it was still happening. "We have a private booking for 32 guests Thursday evening," she said. "I need experienced hands on that floor, not a patchwork of last-minute favors." Elena took a slow breath. "Miss Caldwell, in 9 years I have never once." "I'm aware of your record, Elena." Vivian's voice dropped just slightly, not in volume but in temperature. "Your record is why you're still having this conversation instead of being walked to the door right now for making an unauthorized schedule request. The restaurant does not operate on a debt system. Longevity is not a currency you spend when it becomes personally convenient." The words landed the way a hand pressed flat on a table does, without drama but with complete finality. Elena stood there for a moment that stretched just long enough to be uncomfortable. Then she nodded once, said "understood," and turned back toward the dining floor. She did not argue. She did not raise her voice. She did not give Vivian Caldwell the satisfaction of a reaction worth remembering. She went back to work. But something had changed in the set of her jaw, something quiet and decided, that Vivian did not notice because Vivian had already looked back down at her ledger. That evening, Elena sat in her car in the staff car park for 4 minutes before she picked up her phone. The call she made lasted 47 seconds. The number she dialed was not saved under any name. It had never needed to be. Thursday arrived the way it always did, indifferent to anyone's plans. And Elena Mitchell arrived with it, right on schedule, uniform pressed, hair pinned back, shoes polished to the standard that Valora's employee handbook specified on page 3 and that most of the staff had quietly stopped caring about somewhere around their 3rd month. Elena had never stopped caring. She had arranged what she could for Sophia from a distance, made her calls, left detailed instructions with a neighbor she trusted, and then she had shown up. Because that is the kind of woman Elena Mitchell was, and 9 years had done absolutely nothing to change that particular fact about her. The dinner service opened smoothly enough. 32 guests, a corporate booking, the kind of table that required attention without demanding spectacle. The wine was flowing, the appetizers were landing on cue, and Elena was doing what Elena always did, holding the floor together in a way that looked effortless and was anything but. It was midway through the main course that it happened. A junior server named Price, 4 months in, eager, slightly too fast on his feet for his own good, caught the edge of a guest's sleeve while reaching across to clear a side plate, and a half-full glass of Sauvignon Blanc went over in the kind of slow, horrible arc that everyone in the vicinity saw coming and nobody could stop. It landed on the jacket of a senior guest. The table went quiet. Elena was there in seconds. A clean cloth produced from nowhere. A calm and genuine apology delivered in the tone of someone who understood that the guest's comfort was the only thing that mattered in this moment. A light touch of professional warmth that somehow transformed the entire incident from a disaster into a minor, almost charming inconvenience. The guest actually laughed. Vivian, who had watched every second of it from across the room, walked over. "Elena," she said quietly. "A word." They moved into the corridor behind the kitchen, away from the dining floor, away from the guests, but very much not away from the kitchen staff who went conspicuously still the moment Vivian's heels clicked through the swing door. "You allowed an undertrained server to work a position he wasn't ready for," Vivian said. Elena kept her voice level. "Price caught the uneven tile near table 9. I've flagged that tile to maintenance on 3 separate occasions and nothing has been. I'm not here to discuss the tile." Vivian reached into the inside breast pocket of her blazer and produced a folded sheet of paper with the calm, unhurried movement of someone who had prepared this long before the wine was ever spilled. She placed it on the steel prep counter between them. "This is your termination notice. Effective end of shift tonight." The kitchen went so quiet that the refrigeration unit was suddenly very loud. Elena looked at the paper. She looked at Vivian. She said nothing for a long moment. 9 years, she said finally. Just those 2 words spoken plainly the way a person reads a fact from a page. 9 years, Vivian repeated without blinking. "And still, everyone is replaceable, Elena. That is not a personal judgment. It is simply the nature of this industry." She let that sit in the air for precisely as long as she intended it to. Then she straightened her blazer, turned, and walked back through the swing door and onto the dining floor without a single backward glance. Elena stood in that corridor alone. She picked up the termination notice, folded it neatly along its original crease, and tucked it into her apron pocket. Then she walked back out and finished every single one of her tables. Price watched her work the rest of that service with something close to disbelief on his face. And when Elena finally clocked out and walked through the staff exit for the last time, he noticed the one thing that stayed with him long after everything else that happened that night had faded. She didn't slam the door. There is a specific kind of fear that only a parent understands. It is not the loud, adrenaline-soaked fear of a sudden danger directly in front of you. It is quieter than that and far more persistent. It is the fear that lives in the back of your mind on an ordinary Tuesday evening when your child mentions something in passing. Something small, something that they themselves do not fully understand the weight of. And your whole body goes cold while your face stays completely calm because you cannot afford to frighten them. That was the fear Elena Mitchell had been carrying since Monday. Sophia had mentioned it the way 12-year-olds mention things that trouble them. Sandwiched between what the canteen had served for lunch and a complaint about a geography assignment that she considered deeply unfair. "There's been this same black car outside school for 3 days, Mum. Different spot each time, but it's definitely the same one. Tinted windows. Really quiet engine for how big it is." Elena had said, Interesting," and asked about the geography assignment. And then she had stood at the kitchen sink for a very long time after Sophia went to bed, looking at the water running over her hands, thinking about a number she had not dialed in 7 years. Because Elena Mitchell knew exactly what that car was. She knew the way you know a smell from your childhood. Instantly, involuntarily, with your entire body before your brain has even finished processing the signal. Now, standing in the staff car park behind Velora Fine Dining with the termination notice folded in her apron pocket and the cooling night air on her face, Elena pulled out her phone. The call lasted 47 seconds. She said very little. She gave a location, a description, a time frame. She used no names. She asked one question, listened to the answer, and said, "Thank you," before ending the call. By the following morning, the black sedan was gone from outside Meridian Academy. But gone is not the same thing as resolved, and Elena understood that distinction better than most. Here is what Sophia did not know. and what Elena had kept sealed so tightly for so long that she had almost convinced herself it belonged to a different chapter of her life entirely. 7 years ago, on a wet November evening on the eastern edge of the city, Elena had been walking home from a double shift, still in her velour uniform, feet aching, mind already running through the logistics of getting Sophia bathed and in bed at a reasonable hour, when a teenage girl stepped off a pavement directly into the path of an oncoming vehicle. The driver did not stop. Elena did. She pulled the girl clear before a second car came through, used her uniform jacket to apply pressure to the wound on the girl's leg, and stayed with her on that wet pavement until the ambulance arrived. She gave the paramedics her name and contact number, waited until she was told the girl was stable, and then went home. She did not call anyone. She did not tell anyone. She went home, put Sophia to bed, and washed the blood off her hands at the same kitchen sink she would stand at 7 years later. 3 days after that evening, a man in a very expensive coat came into Valora Fine Dining and asked for her by name. That was how Elena Mitchell first learned the name DeLuca. And that was the moment she understood, with the quiet certainty of someone watching a door open that could never fully close again, that the life she had so carefully kept ordinary was never going to be entirely ordinary again. The black sedan outside Sophia's school had not been a coincidence. It had been a message, sent not by Alessandro DeLuca, but directed at him, through the one person his people had quietly kept an eye on for 7 years out of a debt that Elena had never asked to be owed. Someone knew about that debt. And someone had decided to use Sophia to collect it. While Elena Mitchell was quietly navigating the kind of situation that would have sent most people into a full and spectacular collapse, Vivian Caldwell was doing what Vivian Caldwell did in the aftermath of every difficult decision she had ever made. She moved forward. That was Vivian's most defining quality, and depending on your perspective, it was either her greatest strength or the thing most likely to eventually destroy her. She did not linger. She did not second-guess. She filed termination paperwork, updated the staffing roster, briefed the replacement server in 20 minutes flat, and then closed the chapter on Elena Mitchell with the same brisk efficiency she applied to everything else that she considered resolved. By Friday morning she had not thought about Elena once. She had, however, thought a great deal about Il Risotto. If Valora Fine Dining was where the city's ambitious came to be seen, Illinois Risotto was where the city's powerful came to conduct business that they did not particularly want anyone else to know about. It was the kind of establishment that carried no signage visible from the street, accepted no walk-in guests under any circumstances, and appeared on no public reservation platform known to ordinary people with ordinary connections. You were either on the list or you were eating somewhere else. Getting a seat at Il Risotto required the kind of introduction that money alone could not manufacture. It required the right name extended at the right moment, by someone whose own name carried sufficient weight to open a door that had no visible handle from the outside. Vivian had spent 3 months engineering exactly that introduction. The opportunity in front of her was not a simple dinner reservation. It was the most significant professional moment of her career, dressed in candlelight and pressed linen. A consortium of private investors, the kind whose names did not appear in business publications but whose influence shaped which establishments thrived and which quietly folded, used Il Risotto as their unofficial meeting ground. They were, in the language of the city's inner circles, the people who decided things. Vivian wanted them to decide on Valora. A partnership with this group would mean a capital injection substantial enough to fund 2 new locations, a complete interior refit, and the kind of brand repositioning that would permanently place Valora's name alongside the most exclusive dining establishments in the region. It would mean that everything Vivian had clawed and calculated and sacrificed her way toward for the better part of a decade would finally, irreversibly land. She had prepared for this dinner the way a general prepares for a campaign. 4 days of research. A new suit, charcoal tailored with the kind of precision that communicates seriousness without announcing effort. A pitch refined down to its leanest, most persuasive form, rehearsed until the words came out sounding natural rather than practiced. Background profiles on every confirmed attendee, cross-referenced with their known business interests and previously reported investment patterns. She had left absolutely nothing to chance. Vivian Caldwell, standing in front of her mirror on Friday evening, checking the line of her jacket for the third time, was a woman who was completely, unshakably certain that she had accounted for every variable. She had mapped every possible version of how the evening could unfold. She had prepared a response for every question they might ask and a recovery for every direction the conversation might take. What she had not prepared for, what had not crossed her mind for even a fraction of a second, was the possibility that the most significant person in that room would already be known to her. And that the knowing would go in entirely the wrong direction. El Rosato did not try to impress you. That was the first thing you noticed when you arrived. The deliberate absence of spectacle. No grand entrance, no dramatic facade, no velvet rope staffed by someone whose entire job was to make you feel evaluated. Just a quiet, unmarked door on a well-kept street, a maitre d', who greeted you by name before you had fully stepped inside, and then the room itself, warm amber light, dark wood paneling, white linen so crisp it looked architectural, and the kind of considered silence that only exists in spaces where every single detail has been decided on purpose. It was the silence of a room that had nothing to prove. Vivian felt it the moment she crossed the threshold, and despite everything, despite the carefully maintained composure and the rehearsed confidence she had walked in wearing like a second suit, she felt the room assess her before she had assessed it. She recovered in under 2 seconds. Because Vivian Caldwell had not gotten where she was by letting rooms win. The maitre d' confirmed her reservation with a warmth that was professional rather than personal, and then led her through the amber-lit dining space toward her table near the center of the floor. Vivian followed, her eyes moving the way they always moved in any dining room, cataloging, evaluating, noting the placement of staff and the composition of tables and the subtle choreography of a service operation running at a very high standard. And then her feet slowed. Not because she decided to slow them. They simply did it on their own, the way the body sometimes makes decisions fractionally ahead of the mind when the mind is busy refusing to process something it has already seen. Because the woman at the corner table, the private corner table, the one positioned with its back to the room and its face to the window, the table that existed in El Rosato's unspoken architecture of status, for the most significant guest of the evening, was wearing a black dress that sat on her shoulders as though it had been made with full knowledge of exactly who would be wearing it and where. Her natural hair was full and immaculate, shaped with the kind of confidence that does not come from effort but from having simply stopped apologizing for the space you occupy. She was seated with the posture of a woman completely at ease, not performing ease, not manufacturing it for the benefit of the room, but genuinely, unhurriedly comfortable in a space that made seasoned professionals grip their water glasses a little too tightly. Candlelight caught the hoop at her ear and threw a small warm gleam across her collarbone. She was laughing at something the man across from her had said, a real laugh, open and unguarded, the kind that has no professional calculation behind it whatsoever. And it took Vivian's brain a full 4 seconds to complete the connection. Because the woman at that table was not carrying a notepad. She was not adjusting cutlery or managing someone's dining experience or moving through the room with the quiet, efficient invisibility that Vivian had spent 9 years taking entirely for granted. She was the guest. She was the one being seen. Vivian's lips parted. The name came out barely above a breath, thin and uncertain, stripped of every watt of authority that Vivian Caldwell had spent her entire career carefully accumulating. Elena. The maitre d' turned back with a politely patient expression. Vivian did not move. Because the woman in the black dress had heard her name, and she was already turning around. Elena turned with the unhurried calm of a woman who had been expecting this moment for several days and had simply been curious about the precise shape it would take when it finally arrived. She did not look startled. She did not look uncomfortable. She looked, if anything, faintly settled. The way a person looks when the last piece of something slots into place and the overall picture becomes exactly what they knew it would be. Her eyes met Vivian's across the candlelit room, and she held them there for just a moment, not with malice, not with triumph, but with the quiet steadiness of a woman who had spent 9 years being looked through and had simply decided, somewhere between a termination notice and a 47-second phone call, that she was done with that particular arrangement. And then the man seated across from her pushed back his chair and rose to his feet. Alessandro De Luca was not what the word powerful typically conjures when your imagination is left to its own devices. He was not physically imposing in the way of someone who has spent years making a point of being physically imposing. He was somewhere in his early 50s, silver threading through dark hair that had been cut without vanity, wearing a suit that was exceptional in the way that truly expensive things tend to be, quietly without announcement. His face carried the particular quality of a man who had long since stopped needing to convince anyone of anything. He was not tall. He did not need to be. Because the moment Alessandro De Luca stood up, the room changed. That is the only accurate way to describe it for the purposes of this narration, because language has a limited capacity for the specific atmospheric shift that occurs when a man of genuine consequence decides to make himself visible in a space. It was not loud. It was not theatrical. It was simply the way barometric pressure drops before a storm, imperceptible to those who are not paying attention and completely unmistakable to those who are. The two men positioned near the entrance, whom Vivian had registered within seconds of walking in, because they had that particular quality of stillness that only people in a specific profession tend to have, straightened almost imperceptibly. The maitre d' beside Vivian became very interested in the middle distance. De Luca did not look at Vivian immediately. He looked first at Elena, and what passed across his face in that moment was not the expression of a man looking at a dinner companion or a business associate or anyone that a word like date could reasonably be applied to. It was something older than that. Something that sat in the register of obligation and loyalty and the specific kind of regard that exists between people who have passed through something serious together and come out the other side permanently changed by the crossing. He pulled out Elena's chair. Not with the performative gallantry of a man making a gesture for the benefit of an audience, but with the natural automatic care of someone for whom this particular woman's comfort in this particular room was simply a matter of course. Elena settled back into her seat without a word, and the candlelight caught her earring again, and she looked in that moment entirely and completely at home. De Luca then turned his gaze to Vivian. He looked at her for a moment that lasted considerably longer than was comfortable, with eyes the color of deep water and an expression that communicated, without a single word being spoken, that he knew exactly who she was, exactly what she had done, and exactly how much that information was currently worth. Then he spoke. "Ms. Mitchell is my guest this evening." His voice was quiet enough to be civil and weighted enough to end conversations. "She is also Miss Caldwell, the closest thing my family has to a debt that cannot be repaid." He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Vivian stood in the warm amber light of Il Risotto with her pitch folder in her hand and her rehearsed opening line dissolving somewhere at the back of her throat. And for the first time in a very long career of ensuring that she was always the most prepared person in any room she entered, she had absolutely nothing to say. There is a particular kind of secret that does not feel like a secret when you first keep it. It feels like the only reasonable thing to do. The quiet, obvious choice of a person who does not require recognition for doing what any decent human being would have done in the same situation. It does not feel significant. It does not feel like the kind of thing that will matter 7 years later in a candlelit room that you never expected to find yourself in, sitting across from a man whose name alone is enough to make experienced people choose their words very carefully. Feels like a Tuesday evening. A wet pavement. A split-second decision. And then you live with it long enough to understand that some decisions do not stay the size they were when you made them. 7 years ago, Elena Mitchell was walking home from a double shift on the eastern edge of the city. She was still in her Valora uniform, the one with the small embroidered logo on the breast pocket that she had ironed that morning with the same care she applied to everything, And she was tired in the deep structural way that only a working single mother at the end of a 14-hour day truly understands. Her mind was already home, already running through the precise logistics of getting Sophia fed and bathed and settled before the evening got away from her entirely. She was not looking for anything extraordinary. She was not given the option. A teenage girl stepped off the pavement ahead of her, quickly without looking, the way teenagers sometimes do when their attention is somewhere other than their feet, and directly into the path of a vehicle that was moving considerably faster than the school zone signage suggested it should have been. The driver did not stop. Elena did. She moved without deciding to move, which is the truest form of instinct. The body acting on something deeper and faster than conscious thought. She pulled the girl clear of the road before a second vehicle came through, lowered her to the pavement, and used her uniform jacket, without a moment's hesitation, to apply pressure to the wound opening on the girl's leg. She stayed on that wet pavement, jacket ruined, knees cold through her work trousers, talking quietly to a frightened teenager she had never met, until the ambulance arrived. She gave the paramedics her name and contact number. She waited until she was told the girl was stable. Then she went home, put Sophia to bed, and washed the blood from her hands at the kitchen sink. She did not call a journalist. She did not tell her colleagues. She did not reach out to anyone connected to the girl's family. She had done what the situation required, and in Elena Mitchell's moral vocabulary, that was simply the end of the entry. 3 days later, a man in a very good coat walked into Valora Fine Dining and asked for her by name. That was the first time Elena heard the name DeLuca. The man, not Alessandro himself, but someone who spoke with the quiet, economical precision of a person chosen specifically for their ability to communicate things that required no elaboration, told her that the family was aware of what she had done, that the girl was recovering, and that the DeLuca name did not carry debts lightly or briefly. Elena had thanked him, said clearly that no debt was necessary, and asked with equal clarity that the matter remain entirely private. It had remained private. For 7 years, it had remained completely, absolutely private. Until the black sedan appeared outside Meridian Academy, and privacy became a luxury that the situation could no longer afford. When Elena made her 47-second call from the Valora car park that Tuesday evening, she was not calling in a favor for herself. That distinction mattered enormously to her, in the way that distinctions of principle tend to matter enormously to people who have built their entire life around a quiet, uncompromising integrity. She was calling because Sophia was 12 years old and had done nothing to anyone, and someone had decided to use an innocent child as a means of sending a message to a man who had nothing to do with her daughter's life. That Elena would not absorb quietly. Alessandro DeLuca had listened to everything she said without interrupting once. When she finished, the line was silent for a moment that felt carefully measured. Then he said very simply that the situation would be handled and that Sophia would not be touched. And then he had asked for the first time in 7 years, whether there was anything else, anything at all, that Elena needed. She had thought about it for one night. One night of sitting at the kitchen table after Sophia was asleep, with a cold cup of tea and a termination notice unfolded in front of her, looking at the words, "Everyone is replaceable," in Vivian Caldwell's neat, administrative handwriting. And then she had picked up her phone. Vivian did not get to deliver her pitch that evening. She was guided to her table by the maitre d', with the same polished, unhurried courtesy that Il Risotto extended to all its guests. Her water glass was filled, her menu was presented, and everything about the next 4 minutes looked, on the surface, like the beginning of the evening she had spent 3 months preparing for. And then a member of the floor staff approached her table with a small, respectful inclination of his head and informed her, in a tone that was impeccably polite and entirely non-negotiable, that Mr. DeLuca would appreciate a brief word before the evening's proceedings began. Vivian was guided, not marched, not summoned, but guided with the kind of firm, elegant redirection that made you feel, right up until the moment you were seated in a small private room off the main dining area, that the whole thing had been your own idea. DeLuca was already there when she entered. He was seated at a small table with a glass of water in front of him and the particular stillness of a man who had never once in his adult life needed to fill silence with noise to make himself comfortable inside it. Elena was not in the room. He did not need to be. Vivian sat down across from him and placed her pitch folder on the table beside her. Because she was Vivian Caldwell and Vivian Caldwell did not walk into rooms without her materials, even when some deep and newly awakened instinct was beginning to suggest that the materials were not going to be relevant to what was about to happen. DeLuca waited until she was settled. Then he began. "Valora Fine Dining," he said in the measured tone of a man reviewing something he has already thoroughly considered, "is a well-positioned establishment. Solid revenue, a good location, strong regular clientele." He paused for precisely the right duration. "And until very recently, an exceptional floor operation carried almost entirely by one member of staff." Vivian opened her mouth. DeLuca continued without acknowledging the motion, which was somehow far more effective than asking her to be quiet. "I acquired the operating company behind Valora 6 days ago," he said. "It was a straightforward transaction. The previous ownership group was looking to consolidate their portfolio, and I had specific reasons to be interested in that particular asset." The room temperature did not change. It only felt like it did. Vivian's hand, resting flat on the table beside her folder, pressed down very slightly, the involuntary anchoring gesture of a person whose internal architecture is shifting without their permission. "Effective from Monday," DeLuca said, "the position of general manager at Valora Fine Dining will be held by Elena Mitchell." He paused again just long enough. "With a full ownership stake to be transferred to her name within 90 days, subject to the standard legal process." He picked up his water glass with the unhurried ease of a man announcing something that had been decided long before this room, this evening, this conversation. "You will receive the severance package outlined in your employment contract," he continued. "I believe it amounts to 8 weeks. My legal team will be in contact on Monday morning." Vivian stared at him. The pitch folder sat beside her, closed and absolutely useless, like an umbrella at the bottom of a bag on the driest day of the year. "You can't." She started. "Miss Caldwell." DeLuca set his glass down, and the small, quiet sound it made on the table was somehow the most final thing Vivian had ever heard. "The woman you dismissed had not recorded a single absence in 9 years of service." His voice did not harden. It didn't need to because it had never softened to begin with. "She covered shifts that were not assigned to her. She retained guests that your establishment would have lost without her. She managed your dining floor with a standard of care that your regulars valued far more than they valued the name above the door." He held her gaze without effort or aggression, simply with the complete unblinking steadiness of a man saying things he considered self-evident. "And when she came to you after 9 years of that and asked for a single day to protect her daughter, you handed her a termination notice in front of your kitchen staff to make a point." He let that sit in the air between them like a stone on still water. "The point has now been made in the other direction," he said. "Have a good evening, Miss Caldwell." He stood, buttoned his jacket with one smooth motion and left the room. Vivian sat alone at the small table with the ambient hum of Il Risotto's air conditioning filling the silence around her, her pitch folder beside her, 8 weeks of severance pay somewhere in her future, and the specific airless stillness of a person who has just discovered, at significant personal cost, that the bottom of the ladder looks remarkably similar from every direction. Vivian Caldwell walked out of Il Risotto at 9:53 in the evening. Nobody escorted her in the dramatic sense of the word. There were no hands on shoulders, no firm instructions, no visible display of consequence being administered. That was not how a room like Il Risotto operated, and the people who ran it understood at a very sophisticated level that the most complete form of dismissal is the kind that leaves the dismissed person with nothing to push back against. The maitre d' simply appeared at the door of the small private room with the expression of a man whose entire professional existence was built around making transitions feel seamless. and he held the door to the main dining area open with a small, courteous gesture that communicated, without a syllable being spoken, that the evening had reached its natural conclusion for her. Vivian walked through it. She passed the amber-lit dining room without looking at the corner table, though some peripheral involuntary part of her registered it anyway. The candlelight, the white linen, the sound of a conversation being had between two people with absolutely no awareness of or interest in her departure. The maitre d' held the front door. And then Vivian Caldwell was outside. The city received her the way cities always do, without ceremony, without acknowledgement, without the faintest adjustment to its own rhythm on her behalf. A cab moved through the street. Somewhere down the block, a kitchen exhaust fan pushed warm air into the night. A couple crossed at the far end of the pavement, laughing at something that had nothing to do with any of this. Vivian stood on the steps of Il Risotto and looked at none of it. She was thinking about a corridor behind a restaurant kitchen, and a sheet of paper placed on a steel prep counter, and two words delivered in a tone of absolute, unassailable certainty. Everyone is replaceable. The thing about that particular belief, and this is perhaps the most expensive lesson that Vivian Caldwell had ever been taught, is that it is not wrong exactly. It is simply catastrophically incomplete. Everyone is replaceable in the mechanical sense, yes. Shifts get covered. Rosters get filled. The dining room continues to function and the guests continue to be served, and the machine, as Vivian had always understood it, continues to run. But the machine does not remember who held it together on a Saturday night when 3 staff members called in sick and the private booking was for 40 guests, and the floor manager was a woman who had not taken a single day off in 9 years and who stayed anyway, not because she was afraid of the consequence of leaving, but because she genuinely cared whether the evening went well. The machine does not carry that in any column of any spreadsheet. And the people who sit at the corner tables of rooms like Il Risotto, the people who actually decide how the city arranges itself, they notice things that never appear on a spreadsheet. They notice everything. Elena Mitchell arrived at Valora Fine Dining the following Monday morning at 7:42. She came in through the staff entrance because that was the entrance she had always used, and there was nothing about who she was now that required her to perform the distance she had traveled. The kitchen team were already in, prepping, moving, deliberately not making eye contact with each other in the way of people who have collectively received significant news and are waiting to understand what it means for them personally. Elena poured herself a coffee from the staff pot, leaned against the prep counter and looked at the room for a quiet moment. "The tile by table 9, she said, wrapping both hands around her mug. "I need maintenance here before we open." The exhale that moved through that kitchen was almost audible. Price, standing at the far end of the counter, still in his jacket, not yet changed into his uniform, started to laugh first. A sudden, relieved, completely genuine laugh that he made no effort to contain. The laugh of a person who has been holding their breath for 8 days straight and has just been given permission to breathe again. "Yes, boss," he said. Elena took a sip of her coffee. Outside, the morning light was doing what morning light does when the city is just beginning to remember itself, falling gold and unhurried across the restaurant windows, making everything look, against all the available evidence of the week that had just passed, like it might turn out fine. And in Elena Mitchell's considered and quietly unshakable experience, that was usually exactly where the truth lived. Not in the termination notices. Not in the speeches about efficiency and replaceability and the cold, tidy philosophies of people who had confused the running of a machine with the leading of human beings. But in the tile by table 9 that she had flagged 3 times and nobody had fixed, the junior server who had slipped on it, the 9 years of showing up anyway, the 47-second phone call, the daughter safe at home, and the coffee that was slightly too strong but warm enough. In all the small, unglamorous, invisible things that had mattered all along. And that is where we leave Vivian Caldwell. Standing on the steps of a restaurant she never got to pitch in, holding a folder full of preparation that the evening had absolutely no use for. Nobody could say she did not work for what she wanted. She simply forgot to account for the one variable that her very thorough research had never once considered, the woman refilling water glasses at table 7 who had, as it turned out, rather significant friends. Elena Mitchell, for her part, went home that Friday evening, made Sophia a cup of hot chocolate, and did not say a single word about Il Risotto or Alessandro De Luca or the particular look on Vivian Caldwell's face when a room she had coveted for 3 months quietly showed her the door. Some things do not need to be said out loud to be deeply, completely satisfying. The tile by table 9 got fixed that Monday. It only took 9 years and a change of ownership, but it got fixed. Elena Mitchell never set out to dismantle anyone. She simply showed up, for 9 years for Sophia, for a teenage girl on a wet pavement on a Tuesday evening, and let the weight of that consistency do what consistency, given enough time and the right circumstances, always eventually does. It speaks for itself. There is a lesson buried in this story that has nothing to do with restaurant management and everything to do with how we treat the people around us who do not demand to be seen. The quiet ones. The reliable ones. See those people. Because the world, as it turns out, runs almost entirely on such people. If this story made you think, made you feel, or made you side-eye your own management style just a little, you are exactly the kind of person we make these stories for. Hit that like button if Elena deserved every single thing she got. Drop a comment below and tell us, have you ever worked for a Vivian Caldwell? Something tells us the comment section is about to get very honest very quickly. And if you are new here and this is the first story of ours that found you, welcome. Hit subscribe and stay a while because we have a lot more where this came from. We will see you in the next one.